the way you will get to the next level in whatever the domain is that you're trying to work out is by taking the focus off of you and putting it onto the impact that change can have in your life for other people. It's not how can I stay safe? It's not how can I prove myself? What it shifts to is how can I create more good? Or what is the highest good I can create here? You're combating fear, which is often the thing that's holding us back most, with a turning towards creative generativity, towards what many people would consider to be love. So I want to start by saying I've been procrastinating recording this episode for a few weeks, actually. For one, this is new to me. The whole idea of openly sharing, getting into things, putting myself out in front is a very new thing. And it's kind of at the cutting edge of my own personal growth. Even though I've done a lot of different courses, a lot of different content in the past, this is something that feels new for me. And we have so much noise that surrounds us today from different news, or we have seemingly unlimited episodes on Netflix or Hulu or whatever it might be. And so one of the things I've struggled with when I want to go and create something, what do I actually want to create? What is the thing that is going to be most helpful? And I realized that if anything, what might actually be the thing that kind of cuts through the noise the most is just being honest. So that's what I'm going to do here. I just want to talk honestly about my experience of what I've been learning over the past 6 years doing the Monk Manual, because I think there's a lot that overlaps that I think you're going to be able to incorporate into your own life as well. I'm going to be sharing from my own personal story, not because there's something special about me, but because when you dive into someone's own personal journey, you can see bits of yourself in that journey. And my sense is a lot of the people who come into the Monk Manual community, come into listening to Potent, are going through a lot of the same things that I've gone through and in many ways still going through. So through my own story and through the things I've been processing and working through since starting the Monk Manual, I'm hoping that you can walk away with 5 principles, key ideas that you can put into your life right now with whatever it is that you're dealing with, whatever it is that you might be struggling with. So to zoom out, about 6 years ago, I had this idea to build this thing called the Monk Manual. I started seeing that, wow, there's this opportunity presented by monks that offers us a different way to live. And that idea was really compelling for me because I had been so invested in this modern productivity mindset that just having some other path, maybe a more authentic experience of what productivity felt like it could be, this more whole person productivity approach, it was just so deeply compelling for me. And I was really enamored by the concept of what the Monk Manual could be if I leaned in. But something that's important for me to point out is that the Monk Manual did not start as a market opportunity. It didn't start as something where I was sitting back thinking to myself, oh, hey, how do I build a company that's going to make money or do this or that? It was more so me seeing an unmet need in culture, in people's lives. And I thought that I could speak into that most profoundly, at least to start, by providing tools that would help people live into their potential. And I was so enamored by the concept of what the Monk Manual could be in people's lives. Something that I haven't shared with many people, when I first started talking about the Monk Manual, virtually no one really got it. Very few people understood it, and most people thought it was a bad idea, frankly. And that actually leads me to lesson number 1. If you have a vision, by definition, most people aren't going to be able to see it. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. The Monk Manual serves a community that largely has a lot of visionaries in it, right? Maybe that's something that resonates with you, where you have this capacity, you can kind of imagine a better future for yourself. Chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, that's something that's taking place for you right now, right? Maybe you have a vision for yourself, or your business, or your family. And the thing that's difficult about being a visionary, of having visions for what the future can be, is by definition, most people cannot see that vision. And so what's so common for individuals who are in this place is to feel a certain sense of misunderstanding and isolation, right? With the Monk Manual, one of the things we try to do is we really try to figure out what are the problems that people are facing. And sometimes those problems are very practical. How do I organize my calendar? How do I deal with this particular situation? But oftentimes the deeper reality is we're just trying to navigate these feelings of being misunderstood, of feeling isolated. I started the Monk Manual out of this feeling of seeing what could be and trusting it, because I just believed in it so much. And what I wasn't expecting is just how successful it actually became in a relatively short amount of time. Within the first 2 years, we had grown to over 7 figures in terms of revenue. And in many ways, I think most people would deem it as a really big success, right? There was so much that seemed to be working really well. It wasn't just a product. It was something that actually could really help people. So in many ways, externally, it really is hard to say that it wasn't a success. But especially years maybe 3 through 5, I just started feeling malaise kind of roll over me, which brings me to lesson number 2. Success doesn't look the same for everyone. When we think about success, we often compare ourselves to other people in what we imagine would be a good fit for us. But there's an illusion in that because all people are not the same. You're not the same as I am. I'm not the same as my wife is. My kids are not the same as me. Everybody's just different. We're just different people, right? Yet we often think that success is going to look the same for us as for another person. That's like thinking a seal should be just as happy on a mountain as a mountain goat. We have environments, we have ways of working, we have ways of being that do work better for certain people versus other people. And that's okay. It's not only okay, it's something to really be encouraged to live into. And one of the things that I was experiencing with the Monk Manual is as the business got larger, I've stepped more and more away from doing things that were maybe working directly with the ideas around the Monk Manual or working directly on product development. And I got pulled more into doing a lot more operations, despite the fact that by a lot of standards, it was a successful endeavor and it was serving a lot of people. And in many ways, it was a blessing for me. I still had to acknowledge that the way I was experiencing it was not resonating with what I actually wanted to be doing. I just wasn't thriving. And that's a scary thing. It's scary to realize that what we maybe have gotten some success through is no longer serving us, or maybe we want to pivot. That's one of the scariest things in the world, right? To go and say like, this isn't actually working. Maybe it was working at one point, but it's not working now. And that was scary for me. It still is kind of scary. It's meaning that there's something else that's on the horizon. But at a certain point, you really just can't deny it. And for me, what that meant was I just knew that I had to go and spend more time doing things like this, doing things where I'm directly serving people, trying to work with people, because spending my days working in operations is not the thing that I'm going to thrive in. One of my own coaches at one point had actually told me, you have to get really careful not to become great at building the business that you don't want. And that's always the temptation for us, right? We crowdsource from people. What's the best way to do this? How do I want to build my life? But a lot of people are not us. And so we can take advice that sounds good on the surface, but really it leads us further away from what we desire. And for me, a large part of that was I'm not someone who's going to thrive necessarily in a position of operations, not because I can't do it, but because that's just not what really gives me life. And obviously there's always trade-offs and we have to do what we have to do as part of our role. But I felt more disconnected from what the original goal of the Monk Manual was. And the ideas around the Monk Manual were always the most important thing. But I thought to myself, you know what, I'll start with the tools, because the tools maybe felt safer. And the tools also at the time felt like, well, it's not really about me. And I still believe it's not really about me. It's about the people that are being served. But I also realized that I had rationalized myself away from actually engaging these places of unrest. I had a lot of unrest about the way I was doing my work, the way I was approaching my work, what I was saying yes to and what I was saying no to. The best way to describe this actually comes from a scene I really like from the movie Lady Bird. There's this really interesting scene where there's this tense moment between a mother and daughter, and the daughter's the main character of this film. It's kind of a coming of age type story, but there's a lot of tension between the mother and the daughter. And at one point, there's this really pregnant moment where the daughter asks, in response to something else, she said, I wish you just liked me. And the mother responds, of course I love you. And then the daughter responds back, but do you like me? And I think that's such an interesting question for us to ask ourselves. But if people are asking us, hey, do you love your life? You'd maybe say, yeah, I love my life. But I think when you ask the question, like, do you like it, right? Do you like your life? Do you like the way you're showing up? Do you like the way this relationship's working? Do you like the way you're feeling every day? That's a different question. And it brings us a little bit closer to honesty. And for me, what I was realizing was that there are a lot of aspects about my day-to-day that I just didn't really like. It wasn't necessarily what I wanted. And it was still meaningful. And I did love the work, but I didn't really like it. We can fall into this trap of thinking that the things that we like are actually the things that are against us. But oftentimes our desires are directing us towards a greater capacity, a greater good. And the reason that I didn't like my work as much as I could was because I wasn't really operating in my highest capacity. I wasn't really operating in the place where I felt like I could go and create the greatest good and really serve the most profoundly. Which brings me to the third lesson. And the third lesson is that unrest is a messenger. Unrest is not a threat. We have a question in the monk manual that asks, when did I feel unrest? And a lot of people don't actually like engaging this question. We could oftentimes kind of push away unrest. Why do I want to go and dwell on the negative? But there's nothing inherently negative about unrest. If you have an adversarial relationship with unrest and you kind of treat it like it's an enemy or it's something that's just kind of in the way, chances are you're not actually listening to what unrest is trying to teach you. All of our emotions are trying to tell us something. That's why they're there. And yes, sometimes they can be elevated and sometimes they can get us a little bit carried away or caught up in a moment, but our emotions don't just come out of anywhere. They tell us things. And if we can slow down and really consciously engage these emotions, we can come to understand what's really going on under the surface. Some people face unrest in a particular aspect of their life for potentially a very long time, but because they don't acknowledge that unrest is there, they just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And for a lot of intellectuals, for a lot of people who are a little bit more in their head, there can be this feeling like, oh, my emotions, they're just not as valid because they're not these like clinical, logical statements of reason, but the emotions are actually like data points. They're alarm signals. They're telling us something that either is working or isn't working. And that's such an important thing to listen to because all of our decisions that we make are going to be based on where we're orienting our attention and where we're orienting our action. You could think of it almost like a leader who just never listens to any person that they're in relationship with, right? If we cut ourselves off from these signals, from these signs that can be connecting us with what's really going on, we're really doing ourselves a profound disservice. And the second thing is that we can sometimes think that our emotions threaten our relationships or they're actually a threat to other people. We might even feel like, well, if I really acknowledge this, like what would the consequences of something like that be? We absolutely have to acknowledge the feelings that we have. They are objectively true. If you're feeling unrest, you are feeling unrest. And if you're feeling really sad or you're feeling really depressed or you're feeling really happy, whatever the emotion is, that is a real emotion. Where we get caught is the stories we tell about it. I'm feeling this way. This must be because this person did this to me. Or this must be because I'm not good enough in this way or that way or wherever it might be. The thing that's tricky about it is you can't actually rewrite those stories that are getting you really caught up unless you first acknowledge that the feeling is actually there. So this is one of those areas where I see many individuals getting tripped up because it's really a bold step to acknowledge how one feels, especially if you're afraid of acknowledging it. I once heard someone say that there's things about ourselves that we would be happy to share with anybody. There's also things about ourselves that we're only going to share with those who are really closest to us. And there's still some things that we would only allow ourselves to know. But the most important category are the things that we won't even allow ourselves to acknowledge about ourselves. That's really, if you want to look at where you're probably stuck right now, it's on that level. It's those areas that you're not allowing yourself to really be honest. And the key really is honesty, but honesty does not mean judgment. You don't have to blame anyone. You don't even have to blame yourself. Just acknowledge what's actually happening for you. Acknowledge that there is something there, if there's something there, and allow yourself to pay attention to unrest. See, the real power of unrest is that if we don't actually allow it to come up, we're not going to change. Often when we're stuck in a situation, often when we're not making the progress that we would expect to make, it's not that the situation we're in is good. It's that it's not so bad that we can actually change it. Because we have to feel the pain, the discomfort of what is so that we can recognize that, okay, there actually is something here to change. And if we don't allow ourselves to feel unrest when it comes up, we don't change and we stay stuck in the situation for a very long period of time. Which brings me to lesson number 4. There's 2 types of change, and we tend to only focus on the first one, even though the second one is much more under our control and often brings about the most sustainable change. So normally when we experience unrest and we think about change, we naturally gravitate to outer change. Okay, let's change our material reality. We got to change our job, or maybe we have to change our relationship dynamic, or maybe we have to change the way we're parenting, or maybe we have to change the way we're approaching school, or the way we're approaching our spiritual life, whatever it might be. We think of all these external pieces because on one hand, that's all very concrete. right? We can see very clearly what that is. And frankly, it's not nearly as scary as the second option. And the second option is interchange. It's changing the stories that we're telling ourselves. And as you do this, as the stories you tell yourself about what's going on externally changes, you will find that you change as well. And many of the things externally that you've been struggling with evolve. They tend to just change because you've actually changed. So much of our experience is not so much about what is, it's how we perceive it to be. It's what we pay attention to. It's what we don't pay attention to. It's how we maybe project certain things onto certain people and not onto other people. We edit everything, right? We put everything through our own lenses, our own filters. And many people do not anticipate just how much of your life can change just by shifting the stories that you're telling yourself. And the truth is there are stories that you're telling yourself right now, absolutely, that are not true. Whether those about yourself, whether that's about how your relationship plays out and the causes of that, whether that's about your job or even your career path, there are things that we end up buying into that are frankly not true. Now, that's not to say that it's just internal stories that need to change. Both are necessary, the inner and outer change, and both of them can be done simultaneously. And they work best when they are done simultaneously, when you're trying to work on both sides. And this is why in Potent, we're trying to focus on all the previous episodes, future episodes, on both, right? Sometimes we're approaching both at the same time. Sometimes we're focusing more on the inner, sometimes more on the outer, because this is about actually helping you grow into that fuller version of yourself. As I said, over the past few years, I've been feeling a certain level of unrest, and there's been a lot of having to go back and forth, right? Of outer work, inner work, outer work, inner work. And sometimes it's a slow work, but it's absolutely the case that you look back when you do this sort of work, 3 years down the road, you look back and you say, wow, I'm a different person, right? It's like if you've ever seen a kid that you haven't maybe seen in a year or two, you might see him and say, wow, like that kid really shot up. Before they look like this little kid, now they're a teenager or whatever it might be. We tend to notice that easier with other people. When we're changing, we don't notice these things because the change is so quiet for us. So there's a real emphasis on just doing the work. It's a practice that we keep leaning into. And I've noticed for myself that as I've struggled over the past couple of years with this feeling of unrest, a lot of the issues that were holding me back were not so much about anything external. Maybe I would even think it was something external, but it wasn't really external. It was all inner stories that I was telling myself. Because just like every person listening to this, I have my own programming that gets me stuck, and I also have a hard time moving forward. And I don't think that actually ends, right? Every time we get to the next stage, there's another process for us to go through, and it's difficult, but it is the work. More specifically for me, one of the biggest stumbling blocks was getting over my tendency to want to hide. And that may resonate with you, but I think for me, as someone who does sometimes struggle with feeling maybe misunderstood or a certain level of isolation that comes from that, a natural way to deal with that is to want to hide. I think that's what a lot of creatives do. A lot of people who are trying to create change, it's difficult, it can be scary, and so we have a tendency to want to pull ourselves back. And you can tell this because you will actually feel like you're holding yourself back, right? And pause with that maybe for a moment and just even acknowledge, like, are there areas in your life right now that you're feeling like you're holding yourself back? Because for most of us, we are, right? We all tend to hide to varying degrees and we all tend to hold ourselves back. There's just an audaciousness to growth. There's an audaciousness to moving into another version of oneself, to living into that vision that you have for your own life. I was talking earlier about this idea of how visionaries can feel isolation. It's the exact same thing in your own life. When you have a vision for your life and other people can't see it yet, it feels audacious to say, hey, no, actually, I can become this person. Actually, I do have this potential in me. We're afraid of what will happen. We're afraid of what will happen if we really do the thing that we feel like we're supposed to do. I think that's one of the things that's always attracted me about monks is that monks actually will even physically change their external appearance. They're kind of burning the ships, as it were, to go all in on saying, no, I'm going for this. And I am going to be very different from the collective, and I'm going to try and stand on my own feet. And they do it in an audacious way. I just want to recognize something here. When I first created the monk manual as a married man with 3 kids, I was not a monk. I hadn't been a monk previously. There's a real audacity to that, right? There's no one who gave me an accreditation to say, hey, it's okay for you to stand on this. I'm saying that because there is always an audacity to saying, no, actually, I'm going to become this person. I'm going to do this particular thing for some sort of greater good. Which brings me actually to this final lesson that I want to share with you. And that's that the key to getting to your next level in any domain is to not make it about you. The reason I was actually able to make myself the monk guy was because it wasn't really about me. It was always about, how can I go and help other people? And as I've been trying to step into this next version of myself and put myself out there a bit more, share a bit more of the ideas behind the monk manual, it's the exact same thing, right? I've been procrastinating making this episode for so long. I've been kind of agonizing about it. And the reason that I'm actually able to speak freely and openly right now is because ultimately I'm not doing it because of me. The whole goal of what I'm doing is to try to serve. This is a pattern for me because it's happened twice before. Actually, when I was starting the monk manual, I was agonizing for almost 2 months on what it was that I should actually include in the final version. I had probably another 3 to 4 times as many prompts. And I was going back and forth. Okay, what does the audience want with this? Or what's going to impact them? Or what's going to be most helpful? And what's funny is one night I thought to myself, okay, this is not working. What if I just was going to create this particular tool for one person? What if I was creating it for my son to use as he got older? When he was an adult, this was the thing that I was creating just for him. And it was funny because when that happened, immediately my ability to go and act, to make decisions, to have clarity, it was all right there. I immediately knew this was what I was supposed to do. The version of the monk manual that's now been used by tens of thousands of people was because I had this moment of clarity that really came through love, that came from me turning away from myself and turning outwards to others. And then I saw the same thing happen when I first started doing speaking, and I was really in my head. I was self-conscious. I was, almost like ruminating. And I realized that the real key for me to bring the most value, do the most good, create the most good, was to not think about myself at all. And what I started doing is I would go out, and yes, I would have a plan for what I was going to talk about, but I just forgot about myself entirely. And I would just go and speak to the people there, try to affect some level of good. Now, what I'm suggesting is that the way you will get to the next level in whatever the domain is that you're trying to work out is by taking the focus off of you and putting it onto the impact that change can have in your life for other people. When we turn in on ourselves, we naturally go into places of ego defensiveness, of self-preservation. We get locked in these stories we tell about ourselves because it's comfortable. But when we turn to other people, we ask a totally different set of questions. It's not how can I stay safe? It's not how can I prove myself? What it shifts to is how can I create more good, or what is the highest good I can create here? It's shifting to what is the actual purpose that I can bring into this moment? And that's powerful. What you're doing is you're combating fear, which is often the thing that's holding us back most, with a turning towards creative generativity, towards what many people would consider to be love, right? And why this is probably actually the greatest lesson of all of them is that this one specifically has applicability in all of the big decisions and the small decisions in our life. If you pick any goal or any area of your life you're trying to improve, you're going to be able to improve it faster if you're able to connect in what you're doing from a place of how it's impacting other people. Because that sort of energy fills us up. It gives us a sense of inspiration. It helps to alleviate some of that fear, and it takes our mind off of all the things that are holding us back. And what we do instead is we turn boldly towards what could be. That good that we know, again, as visionaries, as having this vision, we see that thing that could be, and we move towards it. And the experience of it is so much better as well, because it doesn't feel like we're shrinking back. It feels like we're expanding forward. All change can be connected to this sort of service missional element. If you want to lose weight, make it about serving your mission. If you want to heal the relationships with your spouse or your significant other or family members, think about the people involved. Think about how it impacts your children. Think about how it impacts your friends, whatever it is, depending on the situation. If you want to fix your job, start with thinking about how you can bring more service. Think about what good you can be bringing that you're not necessarily bringing. if you're working a 9 to 5, you're going to be there from 9 to 5 regardless. You might as well try and get the most feeling of purpose, bring as much purpose and as much creative generativity as you can. And in most organizations, except the most dysfunctional, you will find yourself rising to the top if you operate in that way. And if it is an extremely dysfunctional organization, just that process alone will probably bring you to a place of realizing you might need to change your career path, or you might need to change where you're orienting yourself or where you're focusing your time or whatever it might be. So no matter what, you always win when you move in that direction. The key thing, as you're facing down this vision that you kind of sense in yourself of where you're being drawn, of this next version of yourself, but you're feeling yourself hesitating. You're feeling yourself kind of on the edge of that diving board, afraid to jump in. If you really want to resolve that, don't focus on what you're losing out on by not taking that leap. Focus on what the world is missing out on by you not taking that leap. Because the world is missing out on something right now. There is goodness that can be in the world that only you can share. I don't know exactly what that is. I'm still trying to work out exactly what that looks like for me. But I know for a fact that it's true. And I also know that your greatest potential is right on that other side of your fear. And so you're always going to have to be navigating that fear. Keep coming back to, what is that impact on the world that they're going to miss out on if you don't keep taking that next step? I want to end with a few questions to help you take what we just went through and make it a bit personal for yourself. The first is, where are you feeling unrest right now? Now, I want you to sit with this question, because usually the first thing that comes up, it's going to be kind of like the surface level thing. I want you to really sit with it and really, really be honest and ask yourself, where is it that you're feeling unrest? Resist the temptation to go and think of stories of who to blame or what are the action steps you have to take. Just acknowledge that the unrest is there. Acknowledge it and see how much unrest is there. Take a minute and just sit with that. The next question I want you to answer is, as you envision this version of yourself that you feel like is kind of germinating in you, these areas of yourself where you're sensing you're kind of growing from one version of yourself to another. What are the character traits? What are the markings, the form of that newer version, right? Is it that person's bolder? Do they have better boundaries? Are they more content? Are they more grateful? What is that, right? Who is that person? It's going to be unique for everyone. But in this exact moment, where are you holding back? Where is that gap? Where's the place that you're sensing you're going? And what's the gap between that? Now, I want you to ask yourself, who is going to benefit when you finally decide to move forward to that version of yourself? That version of yourself that you sense you're becoming. Think of specifically who are those people and how are they going to benefit? And lastly, I want you to ask yourself, how long do you want to wait until you start taking that version seriously? This is not meant to induce any sort of shame. There's a lot of fear, I know, that surrounds all these things. This is just a question for you to really contemplate. How long do you want to wait? Because the feelings you have of unrest about that thing are probably not going to go away. So how long do you want to wait until you address it?